For over 10 years now, since the release of the game, there's been one debate in Skyrim which seems to have never fully fallen out of discussion, and that is, who is right in the Civil War? Many different reasons have been applied to rally for either side, and some people even believe that they are both just wrong. And what I see most often in the conversations circle around a point kind of like this, where the conversation seems to steer around who started what, and what will happen if either side wins. And that's one of the main points I want to talk about today. It seems so often in conflicts like this, where the part of our brains that have to do risk assessment take over and try to tell us it's all about who gets what and who's at fault and whoop-de-whoop. But really, it's not that those are unimportant. It's just that stuff like that isn't important in deciding who's right and who's wrong. And I think this simple misunderstanding is one of the most dangerous things you can possibly think. So, how is the Empire objectively wrong? And I'll tell you, but first, allow me to build my case. And it starts with the fact that there are two forms to both right and wrong. There is individual right and wrong, and then there is communal right and wrong. The individuals in a community come together to establish what is right and wrong. And you can never have an individual's right and wrong be worth more than the community's, unless of course, the community decides so. But why do I say this? Well, it means that every single individual in the world simultaneously always possesses the most prevalent sense of right and wrong. Problem is, nobody gives a shit. It's the community that gets the last say. And if two communities were to come to odds, then they are both neither more important than the other, nor less important than the other. At least in terms of what is right and what is wrong. Because your will is never inherently greater than somebody else's will. For you to admit that yours is, just means that somebody else can do the same, which means that they are again just equal to everybody else who isn't you, which is everybody else. To ignore that is just pridefully selfish. And if you understand how recipes work, like baking and shit, it means every individual's opinions and moral sense is both not the most important, but also deeply integral. So when it comes to conversations like this, it's not that every individual's opinions is automatically wrong because I think they are talking about things that are unimportant. And I understand that this is generally understood, and that people just align themselves with one of the two or three or whatever communities, which then become more important to them than the rest, and that's fine. But why have I just explained all this? Well, it's because, while in itself it may not be able to answer a question of who is right in the Civil War, it does provide a good foundational viewpoint, in that being pridefully selfish is bad. And I would describe being pridefully selfish as believing in one's own experience so much that they completely dismiss another person's experiences and opinions simply because they are not their own. They don't think that they could even be useful. And so that's the first thing I want to establish. But before we get into the second thing, I want to frame it right for you. Oftentimes in situations where we feel we have to pick a side, we often don't focus on the conversation in a way that is conducive in a number of ways. It's not always conducive to progressing our understandings of ourselves, but more specifically, it's not always conducive in progressing our understandings on what is okay to do no matter what you believe in. And I believe a man defending himself is always one of those things. And I would bet a lot of money that almost everybody in the world would agree on that. So instead, I want to shift the point of focus slightly. And in the second part of this video, I want to talk about how I think that the conversations don't really revolve around where they need to. And I want to talk about what constitutes defending yourself. I do think that defining what constitutes defending yourself is very important, and I'll get to that. But first, I have to address how people speak about this topic, and why I think their method is ultimately erroneous. People seem to think that the Empire is fighting the Stormcloaks just because they want to hold off just enough on fighting to regain just enough of their strength and defeat the Thalmor. And people also seem to think that the Stormcloaks are fighting the Empire because they signed the White-Gold Concordat and are agreeing to the ever-increasing demands of the Thalmor and allowing them to take away the worshipping of Talos and other rights, and those are both true, but it's not as apropos as it could be.
Ooh, fancy pants, Rich McGee over here, fuck you.
And I'll try and show what I think is a better way to frame those questions, in a question at the level I think it should exist. But first, let me posit an example of what I mean. Let's say a man has committed a crime, and I ask you, what do you want to do with the criminal? While most people, of course, would say, well, of course we should punish the criminal. And for the most part, I'm not saying that I necessarily disagree. But the question, what do we want to do with the criminal, is deeper still. If all we wanted to do was punish criminals, then how did a criminal even come about? I mean, it's not like you can just get born a criminal, regardless of whatever your local racist might say. What we really care about is stopping crime. And so the question is really about, how do we think dealing with this criminal is the most conducive to stopping crime? So the punishment of the criminal should focus not on making sure this criminal pays for their actions, but instead, because we would want our sons and daughters to grow up in a world where crime doesn't happen. And I think this example serves to show that what I'm saying is true, that when we talk about the Civil War, we usually talk about it at a level which is slightly too shallow for what we really mean and want. And as I alluded to in the intro, people usually say stuff like, oh, Ulfric a thou mors by, or Titus Mede signed the White-Gold Concordat. But if you really wanted to determine who is right and who is wrong, it's not that those are unimportant, it's just that when determining a righteous cause, they do not matter. Posing a question and then having a conversation on points that are completely irrelevant to answering that question is meaningless, even if it might make you feel that you are making progress towards it. They are simply facts of the situation at hand, and instead, you must have the conversation about things that will answer your question. And so, if I think that these points that people bring up are irrelevant to answering that question, what is it that I think will answer this question? Well, it actually comes about answering another question. A question that I've already posed. What constitutes defending oneself? But since defending oneself is a topic which could be very different depending on the situation in which it's asked, I'll frame it a bit more particularly for our situation. What constitutes defending oneself in the case of a rebellion? And I believe that a rebellion is always defensive, and it actually has, in part, to do with the point I've already mentioned. Remember what I said earlier, that a man defending himself is always okay. A man, not a tool, which a government is. It is a societal tool. And also, slight tangent, the first to initiate violence isn't directly equated to being on the offensive side. If I threaten you with violence, that isn't necessarily violent in itself, but it's certainly likely to start a fight. And a man defending himself from threats of violence may be violent, but it's not at all fair to say he started the fight. But anyways, I digress. Back to the question. What makes it defending yourself in the case of a rebellion? Well, as I established, a government is a tool. It's a tool designed to pursue and achieve the best interest of the people. And the best interest of the people is decided by the people, not by the government. A hammer cannot tell you how you want to hammer a nail. If you want to hammer a nail a certain way, you select a certain hammer. And if a government, which is a tool, which is inherently incapable of deciding what is the best interest of the people and only capable of attempting to pursue and achieve its people's best interest, decides to go against its people's will, then that would mean, by definition of what a tool is, that that government is broken. It does not work as it was intended to. And when a tool breaks, you replace it or you repair it. This isn't wrong or even bad practice. It's just safety. A broken tool does more harm than good. But what if a tool refuses to be replaced? What then? And really at the essence of this, what I'm saying is, if a position of representation is corrupted into a position of power, is that not a declaration of intent to do harm? If a tool corrupts itself into a thing that is directly against your best interest, is that not an intent to do harm? A threat? I believe it is. And I believe that those that go to replace that tool are simply defending themselves from harm. Which means, when people start a rebellion, all they are doing is defending themselves from the harm that a broken tool can bring. Now I want to expand on that slightly. Yes, a people will not always know what the best way forward is, and yes, it goes to reason that a representative of some sort has good authority which got them established as a representative, and yes, that makes their opinion extremely valuable. However, if the people, having been fully informed of their representative's opinions, still decide to go against that opinion, then that is their will, and ultimately their right to choose. And as I established earlier, it is with the consensus of a community by which we operate rightfully. It is inherently contradictory to say that since you believe your opinion is the most correct, that therefore it is justified to dismiss the opinions of those you claim to want to protect. And if you are incapable of convincing these people that what you say is true, then as a representative, you would be invalid, either because you are incapable of convincing them of a threat that you know is dangerous, you do not have enough knowledge on the danger to be able to convince them of it, or you don't understand their best interests well enough to know how that danger applies to them. Or, as a non-representative, along with all those other things, it's simply because their interests are different than yours. Now all that means is that a government is always incapable of being on the defensive side in the case of a rebellion. If the people do not want you there, you have no right to stay, justified in your individual beliefs or not. And so, I've finally established that all rebellions are inherently defensive, and that means the Stormcloak Rebellion is inherently defensive, and therefore inherently right. But if you remember the title of this video, and you've been paying attention to the logic I've used to get here, you may have recognized a problem with this logic. How does a person pursuing their best interest constitute as defensive on one side, but not defensive on the other side? Sure, the things I've said absolutely hold true for a government, but what about the people on the side of the Empire? They aren't a government, why isn't it defensive for them? And the answer is that it is. It is defensive at first, but the problem occurs when telling other people what to do or forcing them to do what you say they must. Remember all the way back at the beginning of the video where I established that one community's sense of right and wrong are not inherently greater than another community's. The issue isn't that the citizens of the Empire are just pursuing their best interest. It's in the pursuit of it, they're attempting to force others to comply with the will that isn't their own. The Stormcloaks may be waging war. Maybe they did start a violent and bloody devastating rebellion, but they want to retain something that's guaranteed to all of us at our birth, our freedom of will. They may not have chosen the best path forward, but they are only defending their right to choose, without attempting to tell others what they must do in the process. The point is that people act like it's wrong for the Stormcloaks to rebel, like it's somehow wrong for a man to defend himself. And make no mistake, a rebellion formed on a mistaken cause is still a worthy rebellion. It's not the fault of a man to be ignorant, but it is the fault of his neighbors that he remains ignorant to things only his neighbors know. And if neither of them know, then neither of them can be blamed for simply trying their best. But can you honestly say that you would look yourself in the mirror and tell yourself that you wouldn't try your best simply because you didn't know if it would be enough? Would you look your son or daughter in the eye and judge them the same if their best wasn't enough? Or would you be just as upset at someone who hadn't tried at all? Yes, it's true that the Stormcloaks probably would have had a better chance of defeating the Thalmor if they hadn't tried their hands at a rebellion, but the Empire tried to force them to do something they didn't want to do, and they decided to fight to retain the right to choose. And if you think that isn't a good enough reason to start a rebellion, well, then I would say that your mindset is a bit too idealistic. And idealisms are important, but when it's time to apply them to the situation at hand and they don't work, you can't fault folk for not turning to them. It's not wrong to not know the best way forward, but it's never wrong to defend yourself from a government you don't recognize. That's not to say that we should just let those who are being played for a fool just get swept up in it, but it's ultimately our responsibility as a community to ensure that they are enlightened. And if we are incapable of merely educating our own brothers and sisters, then we were never going to be able to defend what we wanted to in the first place. So how do we educate our brothers and sisters? I don't know, but I thought it was important to speak about an issue that I did notice, which is not unlike the Stormcloaks themselves. Maybe there was a better way to get what they wanted without a rebellion, but they didn't know it. But they still tried their best, and if they understood what they wanted to solve, questions they posed would have had a better chance of solving that issue. And maybe, if they had been practicing a more efficient system of government, they would have been better able to come together as a community and decide for themselves what was right and what was wrong in that moment. But that is a topic for a different video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Goodbye.